They won the war, but humanity lost. Thousands of women survived, yet it felt like someone had stolen their right to breathe. They were taught to hate the enemy, to believe capture was worse than death. And then one day, that same enemy stood before them with soap and warm water and asked, "What's your name?" A name that had long been reduced to a number. It was 1945, a prison camp on a Pacific island where the guns were silent, but the wounds still screamed. Imagine that moment. Women who had been told that Americans were monsters suddenly stood in front of a nurse who smiled and said, "You can bathe now. There's clean water." That first drop of hot water on their shoulders wasn't just water. It was the first touch of humanity after years of war. This is the story of one of those women, Aiko Takahashi, who saw the face of compassion through her own tears and learned that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't anger, it's dignity. That day, when she held a small bar of soap in her trembling hands, it wasn't just soap, it was proof. Proof that maybe humanity hadn't died in the fire. It had just learned how to survive it. And maybe that's the hardest truth of all, that after war, no one dares call anyone enemy again. Because if mercy could stay alive inside a prison, then we have to ask ourselves, when did it die inside us? So now, let's begin the story. A story that will stay with you long after it ends. A story that will make you think, make you feel, and remind you that sometimes even the smallest act of kindness is more powerful than the loudest act of war. This is the story of Aiko Takahashi. September 1945. A makeshift prison camp on a windswept Pacific island. The air was thick with salt and the aftertaste of a war that refused to end quietly. Aiko Takahashi pressed her face against the small porthole of the transport ship, watching the shoreline draw closer. The water below glittered with the deceptive calm that always followed storms. Around her, the other women whispered in low, uncertain tones, Japanese, broken English, and silence mixed in equal measure. They had all heard the stories, that the Americans were monsters, that capture meant dishonor, worse than death, that the only mercy would come from their own hands. The propaganda had been relentless. It taught them to fear, to expect the worst, to never look up. And yet, when the engines groaned to a stop and the gangplank clanged against the dock, the first thing Aiko saw wasn't cruelty. It was order. Wooden buildings stood in careful lines, roofs patched but clean. American flags fluttered, not in victory, but in the weary rhythm of a nation that wanted to go home. She stepped onto the dock with bare feet and steady hands. They had to be steady. A line of soldiers waited, their faces blank but not hateful. They looked like men who'd seen too much and learned the cost of pride. One of them, a tall man with dark hair, held a clipboard and spoke softly to an interpreter beside him. "Name?" the interpreter asked in Japanese. "Takahashi, Aiko," she whispered. The man repeated it carefully, each syllable deliberate. "Takahashi." He wrote it in neat Roman letters on a card and handed it to her like something sacred. "Keep this with you," he said gently. Aiko's eyes dropped to the paper. Her name looked strange in this new alphabet, fragile but real, as if she existed again. "Next," called a woman's voice. Aiko looked up to see a nurse in a crisp white uniform, Lieutenant Ruth Ellison. Her face carried no hostility, only exhaustion softened by duty. "We'll get you settled and cleaned up," Ruth said, her tone calm, almost apologetic. Cleaned up. Those words, back home, would have meant violation. Here, they sounded like something else entirely. The women followed Ruth toward a long, low building that steamed faintly in the afternoon light. Inside, the air smelled of metal, soap, and heat. Canvas curtains hung from iron rods, creating individual stalls. Wooden floors, worn smooth but scrubbed clean. It felt impossible. You'll each have 15 minutes, Ruth said, handing out folded towels, thick, white, untouched. Hot water. Real soap. Please don't rush. Aiko stared at the bar in her hand, pale ivory wrapped in paper with foreign letters, ivory soap. The scent was clean, simple, human. A guard stood by the door, her back turned deliberately. No eyes watched them, no orders barked, just space, private, quiet, merciful. Aiko stepped inside the stall, pulled the curtain closed, and froze. She had imagined death. Not this, not the weight of kindness so unexpected it hurt. When she turned the handle, the shower hissed to life. Hot water cascaded down her shoulders, stinging, cleansing. The soap foamed between her fingers, rich and white. For the first time in years, her skin squeaked clean. The sound broke something inside her. She pressed her face into her hands and cried, the water disguising her tears. These weren't monsters. They were treating her like a person. When she stepped out, her hair damp, her towel soft against her skin, Ruth smiled faintly. "You're all right now," she said. And Aiko, unable to trust words, simply nodded. That night she sat on her bunk in the barracks, folding her new towel the way her mother had taught her to fold laundry. Corners meeting corners, edges aligned. It was a ritual of order, a small rebellion against chaos. From outside came the low murmur of American voices, laughter, boots on gravel, the clink of mess tins. She expected to flinch, but didn't. Days slipped into a rhythm. The whistle blew each morning at 7. The women lined up, their footsteps soft on the dirt path. Breakfast was watery oatmeal and bitter coffee. Strange, but warm. By the third week, Aiko had memorized the routine. Showers on Tuesdays and Fridays, sewing class twice a week, laundry duty on Thursdays. The predictability felt like luxury. In the sewing hall, sunlight streamed through wooden slats, dust motes dancing above tables littered with thread and fabric. Sister Agnes Moran from the Red Cross oversaw the sessions, her Irish accent thick and comforting. "A straight seam is an honest day's work," she'd say, smiling as if that sentence alone could mend a world. Aiko taught the others to reinforce hymns the way her mother had. Double stitch, knot, tuck. "Perfect," Agnes would murmur. "Even a war can't ruin good hands." At night, Aiko wrote in her small diary, a few words each day. Not about politics or nations, but about small things. The smell of soap, the sound of laughter returning, the first time someone called her by name without command in their voice. Across the camp, Sergeant Kenji Sato worked at a metal desk, hunched over stacks of paperwork. A Nisei interpreter, American-born, Japanese by blood. He carried the quiet burden of divided identity. His family sat behind barbed wire in California while he served the country that imprisoned them. One afternoon, Aiko approached his office window. "Why do you write our names?" she asked softly. He looked up, pen still in hand. "Because you're not numbers," he said. "Names remember who you are. Numbers forget." She nodded, unsure what to say. But that night she wrote his words in her diary. "Names remember who you are." By October, the showers had become a sanctuary. Women lingered afterward, braiding each other's hair, humming small tunes that sounded like prayers. The guards never interrupted. Ruth had replaced the torn curtain after a windstorm. Not with coarse canvas, but with fresh white fabric stitched by the women themselves. "See?" Ruth said, smiling. "You've fixed more than cloth today." Sometimes Aiko caught herself smiling back. Then, one quiet evening, news arrived that changed everything. Kenji appeared at the recreation hall door, holding a manila folder close to his chest. His voice trembled just slightly as he spoke. "Ladies," he began, "I have news from the Geneva Commission. You've been approved for repatriation." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Chio Nakamura, Aiko's friend and fellow seamstress covered her mouth and began to sob. The others followed, laughter and tears blurring together. "You're going home," Ruth said, her voice breaking just once. "We'll have your papers ready within 3 weeks." Aiko felt her heart stutter. Home. The word tasted foreign. Could mercy really last that long? That night, no one slept early. They gathered in the shower building after hours, each holding their small, worn bars of soap. Chio pressed her wrapper flat between the pages of her Bible. "To remember," she said. Aiko folded hers into her diary beside the words she'd written weeks ago. They treated us like people. The air filled with laughter, then quiet. Ruth and Sister Agnes stood at the doorway, watching. "Dignity," Ruth whispered, "comes from small things." For the first time in years, Aiko believed her. Outside, the Pacific wind carried the faint scent of salt and freedom. And inside those thin walls, 19 women stood beneath flickering light, clutching soap wrappers like scripture, proof that, in the wreckage of war, kindness still had a pulse. The morning sun over the Pacific was sharp and cold when the news began to unravel. It came first as a whisper, then as a certainty. A transport ship had gone down in a typhoon near the Philippines. No lives lost, but all prisoner exchanges were frozen pending investigation. Photography banned, diaries, letters, anything written by Japanese detainees seized for review. The trust that had been built so carefully over weeks began to fray like fabric left too long in the sun. Aiko watched from the barracks window as boxes of confiscated belongings were carried from the women's quarters. Journals, prayer books, letters home. Her own diary disappeared into one of those boxes, swallowed by official procedure. The small soap wrapper she had pressed between its pages, her proof of mercy, vanished with it. "Just temporary," Ruth assured her, standing in the doorway, hands folded the way she always did when she had to deliver bad news. "They'll be returned once cleared." Aiko met her gaze. "They said that about my brother's belongings," she whispered. "They never came back." Ruth hesitated, then said the only truth she had. "I'll do what I can." But the days stretched into silence. The Red Cross shipments stopped. The sewing classes were canceled. The shower building, once a sanctuary, was now divided by schedule, its hours rationed between men newly transferred from another camp. Privacy gave way to noise and caution. The air smelled of damp wood and bureaucracy. 3 weeks later, the repatriation orders arrived. Kenji brought the news to the barracks, his expression careful. "The manifest has been finalized," he said. "We sail in 5 days." He handed out papers one by one, stamped, signed, precise. When Aiko reached for hers, his voice faltered. "Wait!" He flipped the document over, frowning. Across the top, in red ink, a bold word screamed finality, reassigned. Aiko blinked. "What does that mean?" Kenji glanced toward the office building across the compound. "It means someone typed your name wrong." "Wrong?" "They wrote Takahashi instead of Takahashi." The computer flagged a mismatch. "You're scheduled for the next transport." The words landed like a blow. Around her, women cried and laughed, clutching their papers, home within reach. Chio rushed to Aiko's side, her face pale. "No," she whispered. "They can't leave you behind." Not after everything, but they could. And they did. By afternoon, trucks lined up outside the fence. Chio pressed her palm against the back window, mouthing promises. "I'll find you. I'll write." Aiko nodded once, unable to speak. The engines roared, the dust rose, and then she was alone. Ruth found her an hour later, still gripping the fence. "This isn't right," she said, voice shaking with anger she rarely allowed herself. "I filed a complaint with Captain Denton." "Kenji has proof the error was ours." Aiko didn't move. "Does that matter?" Ruth looked at her, really looked, and for the first time didn't have an answer. That night, Kenji appeared at the recreation hall with a stack of papers under his arm. He spread them across the table, intake forms, medical logs, wage chits, all with her name spelled correctly. 36 times it's written Takahashi, he said quietly. Only once does it say Takahashi. Bureaucracy made a mistake, but bureaucracy doesn't bleed. He turned to Corporal Eddie Ruiz, a young clerk who had been standing awkwardly in the doorway. Can you retype her ID card? Eddie hesitated. If someone authorizes it, sure. But without an order, it's above my pay grade. Kenji nodded slowly, thinking. Then maybe we make the order happen. Aiko slept little that night. The barracks were full again, new arrivals, mostly men, and the air carried tension she hadn't felt since the first day. The showers ran cold, the guards' laughter sounded sharper. Just before dawn, she walked alone to the wash house. Steam no longer rose from the roof. The faucets hissed weakly, water spitting cold. She turned one on anyway, watching it swirl down the drain, carrying away nothing she could name. In her hand, she held the last sliver of soap she'd saved. Thin, translucent, almost gone. She pressed it against her wrist, the gesture more prayer than habit. I exist, she whispered to the dripping pipes. My name exists. 2 mornings later, Ruth appeared at the barracks door holding a manila envelope. For you, she said, her smile small but real. Inside was Aiko's diary. The blue cover worn but intact. Inside, the green ink of an official clearance stamp. Returned, cleared. And between 2 pages, faintly crinkled but still there, her soap wrapper. Ruth sat beside her. Kenji won the appeal, she said. Eddie retyped the card 3 times until it matched. Your name is back on the manifest. You leave in 2 days, Aiko blinked hard, unable to believe the sound of mercy returning. She held the diary to her chest, the wrapper rustling softly, the smallest proof that faith could outlast doubt. The formation was held that afternoon. The autumn sun slanted gold across the compound. Prisoners gathered, guards, nurses, clerks, even men from the other camp who had once shouted insults through the fence. Captain Denton stood by a wooden podium, the official manifest in his hand. Ruth adjusted the microphone, her voice clear despite the static. The following individuals have been cleared for repatriation, she announced, pausing after each name. Each one is recognized under the Geneva Commission and will be transported home with full humanitarian protection. Names filled the air, one by one, precise, human. And then, Takahashi, Aiko. The sound of her name hung there, soft at first, then echoed by the sea wind. She stepped forward, her feet unsteady but sure. Her name, spelled right, spoken right, felt heavier than any metal. Ruth smiled from the podium. Kenji stood behind her, hands clasped, his expression unreadable except for the pride in his eyes. At dawn the next day, the truck waited by the gate. Aiko held her small bundle of belongings, towel, diary, soap wrapper, and the letter Ruth had slipped into her pocket that morning. For mending what can be mended, the rest will heal on its own. She climbed into the truck bed, turned once, and pressed her palm against the glass. Ruth and Kenji stood by the fence, watching her leave. The engines roared to life. The dust rose, and for the second time, Aiko Takahashi left a prison, this time not as a captive, but as proof. Proof that even in war's ruin, mercy could survive the machinery of power. Proof that decency, once chosen, could outlive the flags that claimed to own it. As the island shrank behind her, she opened her diary and wrote the final line. They took my name, and I took it back. With clean hands. The ocean wind carried the words away, mingling with the salt and sunlight. the scent of a world trying to be kind again,